How are you all? Welcome to Clifden and Abbeyglen. I know some of you were here last night. I'll try not to repeat the same jokes. At least you know when to laugh, I suppose. That's kind of something. My name is Ronan. That man topping up your glasses there, his name is Jules, and he's from the Champagne region in France. Very good to have him here in Connemara, and he's chief advisor to the wonderful and the lovely Lavinia there, Lavinia Ward behind the bar, and she makes a fantastic Irish coffee, by the way. But can you please put your hands together for this wonderful team we have here at By the way, also the treatment rooms, the wellness centre behind the hotel there, they've had a couple of cancellations tomorrow afternoon if anyone wants to get a manicure or a pedicure, their nails done, or a massage. Don't worry, it's not me that'll be giving them. It's our lovely Lara, and there's a stack of leaflets there on top of the fireplace, and that gives you just the information on how to contact her if you feel like treating yourselves. And also please take a copy each of these wonderful maps. It's your one-stop shop. It's got 12 recommendations from us here at the hotel around Connemara, and also a lovely, beautiful 1 hour walk which circles the hotel, and it covers the beach road, which is at the end of the garden there, and also the Sky Road, the famous Sky Road. We're very, very privileged and lucky here to be located on what is one of the most beautiful Wild Atlantic Way attractions, Sky Road. There's been lots of movies filmed on it and songs written about it, and before you leave the area, this is a must do. Come out of the driveway, drive 4 miles up the very top of the Sky Road, where there is the most fantastic viewing point that has 300-degree panoramic views of lots of the local offshore islands. Definitely worth a stop. But then a mile up the same road you will come to the entrance of Abbeyglen Castle. That's a black and white picture of it there. And that was the home of the man who founded Clifden and built Abbeyglen. His name was John Darcy. And John inherited a huge part. He built that palatial palace for himself that has the most phenomenal view facing southwest into Clifden Bay. But John inherited a huge part of the Connemara estate from his late auntie, and there was very little in Connemara at the time. The only thing Connemara was famous for prior to the 1800s was a no man's land for outlaws and people trying to escape the law, and because all that mattered back then was the yield that the land would generate. And Connemara was completely unfarmable because of all the swamps and the bogs and the lakes and the mountains. It wasn't ideal for grazing cattle or sheep, so there was no road from Galway out here to Clifden. But John, they often say there's a wildness to the people of Connemara, and it stems from all those outlaws that used to inhabit the land back in the day. I'll leave that one up to yourselves to decide. But John managed to convince a lot of skilled tradesmen and craftsmen from the middle of Ireland. He came from a place called Kiltulla, which is 70 miles east of here. But he's persuasive, and he managed to convince them to pack up their bags and move out here to Clifden, to the edge of the world, in exchange for free plots of land. And one of the first things John did was he wrote to Dublin Castle looking for funding, trying to develop a town out here, and Dublin Castle went one step further. They assigned Alexander Nemo, who's a Scottish engineer. He was assigned to the Connemara district, and his initial mandate was to try and come up with a system, an engineering solution to drain all the bogs in Connemara, to make the land farmable. But Nemo saw the vision of Connemara being a very beautiful place and a place for tourism, and he said, look, there's better ways to use this land. Let's develop a pier at the end of the garden there, and let's draw up plans from a road from Galway out here to Clifden and westward out here to Clifden. Obviously with the pier we started importing and exporting a lot of goods and materials. Connemara was famous for exporting marble. Connemara marble were world famous for that, and lots of shellfish, oysters, lobsters and crabs, and pretty much importing anything else we couldn't produce or manufacture ourselves. A road was eventually built from Galway out here to Clifden, and that was John Darcy and Alexander Nemo really working together. And obviously with the road, it was much more easier to transport and people were more likely to visit. But prior to the road, people used to sail here. It was quicker to sail from Galway City out here to Clifden. And if you had the winds right and the tides were not working against you, that could take 2 to 3 days. But if you got it wrong, it could take 4 to 5 days. And to travel by horse and cart before the road, that used to take nearly 4 days. That was on the condition you didn't get robbed along the way by all the bandits hiding out. So it just puts it in perspective how brave the plan was to create a town out here. But many years later, we're still going, thanks to that man, John Darcy. There's a monument for him behind the hotel there. And he started building his own monument for himself before he reached his mid-40s. He was so proud of all of his achievements. But then the Great Famine came along and he couldn't finish his own monument. So it was left unfinished for many, many years, only that the local community got together in 1991, threw a few Irish pounds into the kitty to finish it forevermore, to honour his great work and his dream and his vision. But John came to Clifden in 1812, and that makes Clifden one of the newest towns in Ireland. And for such a new town, we're very lucky to be associated with 4 phenomenal historical events have occurred here. The first wireless telegram message across the Atlantic happened here from Clifden and landed in Glacis Bay, Nova Scotia, Canada. A legendary Italian inventor called Marconi came out here to Clifden. He had started the project originally in Cornwall, southwest England, but it wasn't operationally viable out there because the distance was just too far across the Atlantic and there wasn't an easy access to fossil fuel and energy in southwest England and Cornwall. So he discontinued the whole operation from there, packed up his bags and moved it out here to Connemara because it solved those 2 problems. It brought Europe a few hundred miles closer to the new continent and also it gave the operation easy access to fossil fuel and energy. And obviously we've an abundance of this lovely stuff burning in the fire there, peat or turf. And if anyone wants to take a piece of this home with them, you're more than welcome. And a couple of years ago, the Irish government, when the Greens were in power, changed the legislation on it, so it became instantly more valuable overnight. But anyway, so Marconi came here to Clifden in 1906, and 3 miles south of here at Derry Gimna Bog, he had a 300-acre site. That's the equivalent of 450 football fields stacked side by side. And he erected a 270-foot antenna. That's how primitive the technology was. There was a condenser house and a boiler house and a train that ran non-stop around the operation 24 hours a day. At one point, Marconi nearly employed 1,000 families here locally. That was a huge scale of production and employment for a small, isolated community. But it didn't last forever, sadly. Nothing gold can stay. In 1922, the IRA decided to burn the whole site down. And a lot had advanced in terms of innovation around radio telegraphy. The station here in Connemara wasn't warranted any further. By then, signals could travel much further across the Atlantic and then bypassing poor old Connemara here. But look, the most interesting and fascinating part of the whole radio and Marconi story is about an unsung hero and a true legend for all time called Jack Phillips, who came from Surrey, which is south of London there. And he was a student of Marconi for a number of years, learning the art and science behind radio telegraphy. And he was so good, he stood out from the class, built up a very strong rapport with Marconi. So much so, he was asked to come out here to Clifden to oversee and run the whole operation for Marconi here on the ground. And as a sign of Marconi's gratitude and appreciation for everything Jack had done for his whole dream and empire, he decided to gift him with the most fascinating present anyone could have ever received at that time in the world, which was 2 tickets for the maiden voyage of the Titanic. But Jack was the real hero that night. The Titanic sank. and he got lost out in the history books somewhere along the way. But Jack was the first man ever in history to send out an SOS to save our souls from a ship. Never had this been done before. And therefore, he was directly and indirectly responsible for saving over 700 lives that night the Titanic sank. And as the Atlantic was swallowing up the ship that evening, Jack was noble and heroic enough not to take up one of those seats for himself. Therefore, part of the 1,200 lives that was not recovered from the Atlantic that evening, and the poor chap, he got no subplot in the last Titanic blockbuster, the one we all know, Love and Adore. But we do try and keep his legacy alive here each evening in the Abbeyglen bar. So I'm going to ask you all, would you mind help me raise a little toast to the great Jack Phillips? To Jack Phillips! To Jack. You're running low.
You're tight. You're running low, you're tight.
Tell him that.
And we're also famous. We're also famous for the first transatlantic flight. I'm sure all of you know the first transatlantic flight landed here on the 14th of June 1919. Sir Captain John Alcock and Lieutenant Arthur Whitten Brown. Nice picture of them up there on the wall. But they were in the race for 10,000 British pounds worth of prize money that Lord Northcliffe owned the UK Daily Corporation, based and headquartered in London there, and his bread and butter was printing newspapers. So it was his agenda to try and increase his market scope. So he wanted to print newspapers in London and have them flowing over to New York before Wall Street woke up in the morning. Effectively, they could sell a lot more newspapers to a much bigger audience. So he put up £10,000 worth of prize money, which is worth about £1 million in today's, by the way. And the idea behind that was to speed up innovation around transatlantic aviation. So those two men took off from the east coast of Canada and flew for 16 hours and 12 minutes through horrific conditions, driving rain, dense fog, thick snow, and a Vickers Vimy aircraft that was powered by 2 Rolls-Royce engines. And it was so loud on board, they used to have to write each other little notes to communicate along the way. They couldn't hear each other. And it was so cold. They had these electric blanket suits designed, like electric blankets that you have in your bed, but a suit version of it, with a big power battery bank between them that could turn the air conditioning up and down. Money messing with the air conditioning. But they used to dive the plane from about 500 feet to 30 feet just to get a gauge of the horizon. And then they pull out an old-fashioned sextant, which is used to measure the distance between the horizon and a particular star. They'd pull out an old-fashioned almanac and use their measurements to get some kind of coordination where on the globe they might actually be. So their plan was to fly all the way to London, but after 16 hours, when they came to the west coast of Connemara, they said, "Beck it, no more. Let's try and land this machine there," with not a very well thought out plan B. Now, they did 2 massive loops of the greater Clifden town area looking for a flat field to try and land their aircraft. And see, they didn't know what bog was because they came from Manchester. And what happens when you try to land an aeroplane on soft, wet bog? It sinks, right? So anyway, there's famous pictures of the plane completely pitch bowled because it came to an abrupt stop. Now, luckily, they were actually sipping whiskey the whole way across the Atlantic for medicinal purposes to keep warm. And that had the additional advantage of helping with the post-traumatic stress disorder. So they rode out of their machine at the Marconi station. They had a couple of bottles of well-deserved, probably Italian Barolos, given it's Marconi, with their new friends at the radio station, and a couple of hours later a wireless telegram message made it over to London to claim the £10,000 worth of prize money. Sadly, the 2 lads never ever came back to Abbeyglen or the west of Ireland to spend any of that money, and we're not bitter about this at all. But we had the centenary there 5 years ago. We had a massive party here in Clifden that went on for 3.5 months, and as part of the celebration, my brother Brian managed. He spent a lot of time writing and asking and pleading with Heathrow Airport in London to lend us a statue of the two guys. A concrete statue that was commissioned in the 1950s, as high as the ceiling there, weighs about 10 tonne, and both of us went over to Heathrow Terminal 5 to watch the statue begin its journey back to Connemara. And Heathrow said, yeah, you can have the statue as long as you leave it on the grounds of the hotel. You're responsible for it. We said, fine, no problem. So we parked it outside the front door of the hotel there. But one evening, something incredible happened. All the stars aligned, and a philanthropist walked through those brown doors there right about now, kind of 7:05.
Oh, yeah.
And he loved the story about us getting the statue to Connemara and the effort behind it, and the fact that we managed to pull it off. So when he showed so much enthusiasm, we naturally reciprocated and made sure his Prosecco glass didn't reach the halfway mark at all during and then up in the dining room we took out some of our finest Bordeaux red wines. And then late into the night, around that piano there was an almighty sing-song, and there was a lot of gin and tonics consumed. A few pints of the Connemara ale. It's locally produced, and it's kind of hoppy but fruity and crisp. Highly recommended. And then we finished the night off with top shelf whiskies, and at 4 a.m. in the morning this philanthropist agreed to write a cheque for €150,000 to get a bronze version of the statue commissioned. So then Heathrow came knocking on our door after 3.5 months looking for their beloved statue back. We were secretly hoping they'd forget. That didn't happen. So reluctantly, the statue began its journey back to London. And then something very strange happened along the way. The statue actually went missing for 48 hours. That's because we were getting a cast and a mould taking up the original, which we were strictly prohibited to do. But we went ahead and did it anyways. And then days before the first lockdown in 2020, we unveiled that bronze statue down in Clifden Square there for everyone here to love and enjoy and appreciate. So if you get the chance while you're staying in the area, please check out that statue. You got all the gossip and background behind it, and I can trust nothing will leave these four walls here, right? And then we're also famous here in Connemara. Sorry, I'm getting thirsty. The man who founded the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, is a Connemara man called Richard Martin. He was our local politician. He represented the people of Connemara in Westminster, London, and he was the first man ever in history to introduce any sort of animal rights protection into legislation, and he globally, never had this been done before. Animal welfare was not a topic, but he introduced the Cattle Act 1822 across the line in Westminster, and that became the foundation then for the RSPCA. You might have noticed the odd random house in the middle of a lake as you're driving through Connemara. But they were Richard Martin's prisons, right? And he used to tell any farmers that were cruel to their cattle, he used to send them out to these prisons. And he told the farmers there were sharks in the freshwater lakes, so they wouldn't swim to the shore. Now, as well as having a lot of empathy for the animals, Richard had a soft side for the local women here in Connemara, and it was reciprocated. Like, women loved him and men wanted to be him, and he would have made for a great Love Island contestant back in the 1800s. His antics, now you remember in 1822 there was no Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. Words travelled very, very slowly. There were no cell phones, but yet his antics around Connemara caught up with him in London circles, and around Soho and Knightsbridge and Kensington. Richard became known as the great humanity dick of Clifden. Richard, you get it? Yeah. So anyway, there was a local publican in the town decided he was going to make a few quid off the situation. Maybe he was ahead of his time, so he decided to name his pub with Sedge name on the door. Humanity Dicks. But in a very conservative Ireland in the early 1800s, people were naturally afraid to go into a pub with such a name on the door. They didn't know what they would find, right? So anyway, the business wasn't great after a few weeks. The landlord had to change tact, rebranded the pub to a slightly less offensive name. That was Humpties. Not as severe as the first one. And many years later, today it's still known as the local Apache Pizza takeaway restaurant. and every time I tell this story, I can hear poor Richard turning in his grave. We're diminishing his own legacy over the decades, but we try to keep his legacy here alive each evening in the Abbeyglen bar. Can I ask you all one more time to help me raise a little toast to the great humanity Dick of Clifden? Have it? Jeez, you're live enough. Nearly there, I promise. And we're also famous, the Connemara, for the Connemara pony. Huge part of our culture and our heritage, something we're very, very proud of. And all the result of a freak accident in the year 1588. There was a Spanish Armada ship called the Falco Blanco, which was in battle off the south coast of England, and things weren't going its way. So instead of taking the short route home across the channel, as the crow flies, that would have taken 3 days. The Falco Blanco thought it was safest to go anti-clockwise all the way around the Great British Isles. So it turned a 3-day journey into a 3-month journey. And eventually, this poor ship, battered by planet Earth, ended up on the west coast of Connemara. And on board, typically on board any of these Armada ships, there would have been roughly 100 galleon horses, which is a huge giant Spanish horse. The Spaniards would have trained and tamed these beautiful beasts for battle. So the Falco Blanco pulled in here to Clifden Bay, trying to harbour from the storm. The storm got the better of it, and the Falco Blanco sank to the bottom of the Atlantic. But naturally, these horses swam to the coastline to save themselves. And when they got here, they were out of sorts, and they were homesick, and they were cold, and they were miserable, and they were missing the warm tropical weather of the south of Spain and the Middle East. And they got very, very bored very, very quickly. You remember 1588, there was nothing here in Connemara at the time. It was no man's land. So they decided after a short period of time, Beckett, we might as well integrate ourselves into the local community. So they spotted a little horse up on the hill. And they eventually worked up the courage. They were practicing their best Irish. Got up to the top of the hill to make their acquaintance with the local horse. And when they got there, they were delighted, pleasantly surprised to find out the local horse was also a foreigner here in these strange lands. Was originally from Iceland. And don't ask me to go into too much detail, but the Icelandic horse was very small, not much bigger than a Shetland pony. And remember, the Spanish horse is that size. But they came together and they made it work somehow and created these beautiful iconic babies that spent centuries and centuries wandering the land of Connemara in very, very hostile and harsh conditions. And they often have to go days and days without food and water, but they learned to navigate all that adversity. They came out the other side despite all the odds stacked against them. And that is why breeders from all over the world love and celebrate these creatures so much. It's because of their history and their lineage and their exotic DNA and what they came through to, I suppose, end up here. And they are absolutely beautiful creatures to work with and to look at and to photograph, and long may they last. But just a little bit about Abbeyglen before it's dinner time. Abbeyglen was built by John Darcy, the founder of Clifden and the owner of that castle up the road. And John's intention was for Abbeyglen to be the hunting lodge for his main abode. But John, he was a bit of a devil. He actually fell in love with somebody else from the other side of Ireland. It would never happen today, but it did back then. And so Frances, his first wife, gave him the P45, And to keep the peace, he gave her ownership here of Abbeyglen, and she moved in and ran it as an orphanage for many, many years. And she used to wander the land of Connemara looking for homeless children and brought them into Abbeyglen and gave them food, education, shelter, a sense of purpose, and made sure all of her students felt loved and adored and ready to take on the world whenever they left those doors. Then their eldest son, his name was Hyacinth. Hyacinth was left in charge of his father's estate. I know, unfortunate name. Unfortunate name. But after the Great Famine, he sold up the estate for little or nothing to the Eyre family who came from Bath in the UK. And Hyacinth actually fell into religious life in a big, big way. He came into Abbeyglen and continued his mother's good work up until 1950. And then Padraig Joyce and the Joyce family came along, converted Abbeyglen into a hotel, and they ran it for 19 years between them. That's when my mummy and daddy came from the other side of Ireland, and they ran the place for 50 odd years between them. And in fact, me and my brothers grew up here in the castle, and we used to spend our childhoods running up and down the corridors and knocking on all the doors and running away to see if we could get away with it. And we were genuinely very, very bad for business. But you'll be happy to know we've stopped that now.
Oh, I caught you.
Brother Brian's been steering the sinking ship for the last 30 odd years, and 5 years ago he asked me to come home from London and offered me a 75% pay cut to come back and help with the family business. I couldn't say no to this generous offer. But listen guys, you're very lucky to be here this evening. We have one of my favourite piano players of all time. His name is Sean de Borca. He's an absolute, I can hear him starting up in the dining room now. And then he'll be down here from 9:30, 10 o'clock onwards. And he's great crack and he's absolutely gifted. So we're very honoured to have him here tonight. Hope you enjoy it. Don't go to bed. Please don't go to bed too early. We're serving dinner now. Thank you for being best audience ever. And the password is cheers, and hope you have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.